Office staff on actual and perceived barriers to digital records transfer. We had expected the issue to be raised. We had expected issues to be raised about process and requirements. However, the barriers that we identified were actually more about the strategic and environmental factors. So we're now commencing work on the recommendations to address the barriers, which are achievable within our own work program and resources. That will include new communication to encourage greater visibility in disposal and transfer programs in strategic planning with your agencies, the importance of planning for decommissioning and guidance on how records can continue to be accessed after transfer. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank the agency staff who shared their insights with us, and we will be releasing further information throughout the year. In terms of records transfers, over the past 18 months, significant efforts have been dedicated to adoption records transfer. We've collaborated closely with Birth, Deaths and Marriages, the County Court, the Supreme Court and the Department of Justice and Community Safety. So we've successfully retrieved and transferred previously inaccessible records from various locations around the state. It's an ongoing initiative to ensure these records are securely archived and providing adoption agencies with more accurate data to better assist those seeking information. Currently, preparations are underway to transfer records from an additional 26 courts. We're also working with the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action on the transfer of physical Crown Reserve files and other records from various regional offices to PROV. The files will be progressively transferred to PROV over 24-25. The first consignments of the records, which originated from the Hamilton region, have already been transferred, and we're planning at the moment for the next uplift of records to come in. Some of you may also be interested to know that we have recently announced funding for 42 organisations for the local as part of the Local History Grants program. This includes projects about newspaper and photographic digitisation, memorial websites, digital histories, oral histories and archiving projects. In 23-24, around 175,000 digitised records were uploaded to the PROV website. Some highlights are that wills are now available up to the year 1950, so a great boon for researchers, particularly family history researchers. And we've completed uploading copies of the registers documenting children put into state care, so wards of state, up to the year 1924. Okay, that's all my updates. So we're now going to move to our exciting lineup of speakers. Each speaker will have time at the end of their presentation to answer questions for our online audience. Our administration team are online to help with any queries or to deliver your questions. So our first speaker today is the new Victorian Information Commissioner, Sean Morrison. Sean was appointed the Victorian Information Commissioner in February of this year, so very recently. Mr. Morrison has significant experience leading the legal responses to key Victorian government reforms, including royal commissions and information sharing regimes. He has degrees in information technology and the law and a Masters of Public Administration. Prior to his appointment with OVIC, he was appointed as the Special Investigator at the Office of the Special Investigator and has served as the General Counsel at multiple Victorian government departments. So we welcome Sean today to provide insights on freedom of information, privacy and record keeping. So welcome.
Thank you everyone for inviting me Thanks to PROV for inviting me today to speak about records management. I'd just like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting today, and I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and the elders from other communities who may be with us here today. I'm in sort of to contrast the record management styles. I know Justine was using her quite funky notebook, and I'm going with old school paper. So I'm going to manage a microphone, slides, and the paper. So bear with me because you know, it could get all too complex for me. But look, it's great to be here. I've been the Information Commissioner for 6 months, and as noted before that, I was the Special Investigator, head of the Office of the Special Investigator. I think that experience taught me how critical records management is in Victoria and to the functioning of the public sector. As head of that office, I was required to effectively shut down or decommission that office, and that involved the transitioning of records to PROV. Formerly, my life as a lawyer, records management is something that lawyers pay lip service to usually, and we see usually in legal matters, for example, they come to the fore where there's that missing document or there's been improper records management. It always is hyperspeed at the most critical moment when you can't find that one document you're looking for. With decommissioning of the OSI, we found that, for example, I didn't even know that you needed archive boxes with special plastic or cardboard that wouldn't destroy documents. So there's all these things that go into record management that are quite critical and pivotal to the operation of the public sector, and people only turn their minds to it when it's too late. So effectively at OVIC, our functions rest on the good governance of records and of the people in this room and online doing their role, because when it comes to FOI, when it comes to privacy, when it comes to information security, record keeping is the central process of all of those things. And in true style, I didn't even have my introductory slide up, so forgive me. I thought it was loaded for me, so we're off to a great start. So look, our goals as an independent regulator are to promote and uphold information rights in Victoria, and we want to build relationships based on trust where public organisations feel engaged in ongoing, meaningful dialogue about privacy, information security and access to information during decision-making processes. And as I just referred to, we need record officers and information managers to perform their goals and help OVIC co-deliver these outcomes. For example, we look at privacy. Privacy is dependent on an organisation's adherence to information privacy principles, such as IPP3, where an organisation must take reasonable steps to make sure that the personal information it collects, uses or discloses is accurate, complete and up to date. So without records management, you can't adhere to the privacy principles. In relation to access to information, and we think about here traditionally FOI, but it could even be requests outside of the FOI Act. Without appropriate record categorisation and storage, records are difficult and costly to retrieve. And then we think about information security. Without adherence to retention and disposal authorities, we're seeing the impact of data breaches magnified. On this point, OVIC is co-partnering with PROV to deliver what we think is some guidance around data breaches and retention and disposal authorities. This guidance should be released soon, and what it will focus on is that effectively no one is safe. You're most likely, regardless of your information security controls, going to have a breach, and we're seeing that these breaches are magnified by people not adhering to their retention and disposal authorities. So without, we've seen it in the federal sphere and we've seen it in Victoria. People over-collect, then they hold that information beyond the requirements, they get hacked, and then what happens is the breach is 5 times bigger than what it could be. We have common goals, and we're connected by common goals. I think the other challenge that is facing all record keeping officers, PROV and OVIC is the emergence of AI and new technologies. Our line at OVIC has been that we are not anti-AI. We are pro-technology, but we're seeing a feeling that there's a bit of crypto buzz around AI. Everyone's got to be in on AI. If you don't have AI, you're a Luddite. If you don't have AI, you're behind the times. The thing with AI we've seen is that it's not just another tool, and there needs to be clear training, guidance and instruction to officers and this digital literacy before we introduce AI to the world at large, to every public sector official or officer working. So I think AI has some great potential, for example, in retention and disposal authority, in categorising records, taking the categorisation of records away from the manual choices that people have to make when they're categorising a record. Is it cabinet in confidence? Is it sensitive information? So taking the human error element out of it. But also we see that people don't know the fundamentals of privacy, records management, records keeping and their requirements at the moment. So with AI, when you're entering in information, it's personal information, and it's giving you back new personal information, just as PROV's latest guidance states, this is a new record. You need to store it. The same with cloud computing. So I think the challenge for record officers and information officers is getting that digital literacy up from right now. So there's no point bringing it in when the systems come in. There's a whole lexicon and language around AI that I think people need to be trained and upskilled in, that really you need to front foot it now. So I feel for everyone whose job is to try and educate people on these technologies, but we keep saying the time is now. So I just wanted to quickly link this to some changes that might be coming for records management, and that is, forgive me, my slides are slightly out of order. And that is the report on the culture of implementing freedom of information in Australia. So this report is online, and this report relates to, there was a piece conducted by Monash University. OVIC was one of the organisations that was a partner in this research, and effectively it interviewed some government ministers, senior executives and FOI officers about what they thought about FOI in Australia. And Western Australia, South Australia and Victoria effectively took part. There's a number of recommendations. I won't bore you with the ones about FOI, but the ones relevant to record management are up here on the screen. And they talk about, the recommendations are that there should be the provision of recurring records management and FOI education for wider agency employees, including executives. There should be insurance that records management rollout is consistent with both records management best practice and FOI efficiency, and that working with state public record officers regarding agency adherence to record management policies and strengthening the knowledge and understanding between record management best practices and FOI efficiencies. So the study really found that there was a disconnect between some senior leaders in organisations. They found that records management was a chore and potentially a distraction, or that their systems were best practice, while the officers involved in using those systems found that there was a disconnect. So, as I said, this study is online. OVIC has accepted all of these recommendations, and we're going to be partnering with organisations like PROV and also with the agencies we regulate to make sure that they get this training in place. Of note was that there wasn't much take up from ministers in discussing the response to this report and being involved in it. I wouldn't take too much into that. All I would note is that ministers usually make change by bringing on legislation. So I think there is commentary in the report about the lack of involvement from the ministerial class, but I wouldn't read too much into that. I mean, it was conducted during the pandemic as well, and I'm sure they had other things on their hands. So the other piece of work that I think is relevant is the Integrity and Oversight Committee's inquiry into FOI in the Victorian Parliament. And why I think this is relevant is that OVIC made 77 submissions, and a lot of them centred on changes to record management practices. So the IOC is considering OVIC's submission along with PROVs and another organisations. Some of the organisations you may be from have made submissions. They're due to report back this year, and some of the things that we recommended were that government should revisit a whole of government information management framework. The principle of access by design should be embedded into the whole of government information management framework. One that I think hopefully everyone would agree with, that there should be a requirement in legislation for record keeping, information management and access to information training for all public sector employees. So that's mandated in legislation, not part of an onboarding process. And also that there should be a requirement for agencies and ministers to maintain an information asset register, and that agencies and ministers should be required to appropriately record and publish information relating to the use of AI and machine assisted decision making. So it's noting, like PROV have, that where AI is involved, this is a record and this is a creation of a record. So with the committee due to report back later this year and make recommendations on changes in law, there will be an impact on record keeping potentially. Of course, this still has to go through the process of the government looking at the committee's recommendations and whether they accept them or not, and then moving to legislation. Who knows how long that will take, whether it will be in this election cycle, but there is hope, I think, for records management and potential changes in law on the back of this inquiry. I just wanted to quickly also talk about the other aspect of our work, which is privacy. And I highlighted before that records management underpins privacy, good privacy practice in government. For example, IPP3 is about making sure that, IPP4 is about making sure that the data you collect is accurate. We've seen approximately 30% of complaints to OVIC in the last financial year concerned a breach of IPP4. So that is records that were held that weren't accurate or up to date. We've also seen in the privacy sphere, poor records management has led to large privacy breaches. So we've seen over-collection with privacy and over-collection or collection that's not necessary. And this is where I think records management is important, is explaining to people that just because you can collect it, it still needs to be necessary to your function as an agency. So even if you have access to this information, it will be nice to have. It's still underpinned by that privacy works. The first principle is it needs to be necessary for your agency to perform its function. And this is, I think, records management and privacy intertwined. Once you over-collect, you've created a risk for your own organisation. And then also you get into the data breach territory where you've over-collected, you're exposed from a larger data set. And the more personal information you have about someone, the greater the target you are, and the currency of that information is more valuable to bad faith actors. Just some of the slide highlights that the public sector is entrusted with people's personal information, and a lot of the agencies people work for have a social licence. So people provide information for a service, and we saw through the pandemic that some of these social licences became fractured, and there really is this inherent trust that citizens need to feel comfortable sharing their information. The more they're comfortable to share, the better for policymakers, and so it goes on. So in Victoria, obviously, we have the 10 information privacy principles that guide the way public sector organisations can store, collect, secure, use, disclose and provide access to personal information. I'm sure everyone's across the IPPs, but I think it's amazing that people don't understand that once information's in their organisation, that doesn't mean it's free to use for all facets of the organisation. Just because one area has it doesn't mean that providing it to another area is not a new collection, use or disclosure of that information. And OVIC considers that AI, when you, as I've said before, when you put information into an AI system and you get new information out, that is a new collection of personal information. So you need to advise people you're collecting information from, the purpose it's for, and I think the first principle is go back to your collection statement. What did you tell people you were collecting this information for? What is the purpose? So when someone comes to looking at it again, it's great you've got housing data or you've got demographic data that identifies someone and you want to use it in another project, go back to the collection statement. See what you actually told people. Work through what would be reasonable as a secondary purpose. It's amazing that data just flows around government without consideration. And it's the thing to get traction with decision makers is it's actually creating risk when you just let data flow around without thinking about, is it necessary, should we have it? All these agencies end up with huge data lakes, creates risk and exposure. Information security builds resilient information culture. So at OVIC, we also oversee information security. We're responsible for information security obligations on public sector organisations, and our information security team has found that organisations usually deal with security from a tick and flick approach. That's rather than a continuous evaluation, re-evaluation of information assets and risks. They just use a tick and flick approach. Are we secure? Have we been breached? Are our controls up to date? OVIC's developed an information security framework, the Victorian Protective Data Security Framework, which includes 12 mandatory standards for public sector entities. While all of the standards are underpinned by good information and records management practices, of particular importance is Standard 2. The standard requires an organisation to identify and assess the security value of public sector information it holds, and also requires the establishment of an information asset register. So I think that the attestations are coming up for the standards, and again, it's around this tick and flick exercise. It's making sure that everyone's connected to what is required, what do the standards require, what underpins them is good records management, and you really need to turn your mind to the controls you have in place, because if your organisation has a data breach, the first thing OVIC will do is go back to your standards and your compliance report on those standards. And it is a self-assessment. There's optimal to mature, and it's quite easy just to give yourself a self-assessment of optimal. But we'd be asking questions, and so would other organisations, if you gave yourself optimal and then there was a simple data breach. So I think it is underpinning all of this security and this security resilience. It comes back to good records management. I think that records management gets a bad rap because it seems like it's work that is, I won't say dull, that's the wrong way, but people outside looking in see it as just a compliance check, but it underpins nearly everything an organisation does, and all of the risks are foundational on good records management. So I know I'm singing to the converter, but it's the amount of times we see poor record practices result in a data breach or in a complaint about FOI for sufficiency of search. It's not one-to-one, but it's a high correlation. Look, the other thing I'd like to speak about is the building resilient information culture theme, and that is that OVIC observed between July to December 2023 that approximately 90% of incidents reported to OVIC were caused by people, that is human actors, with a large increase in the number of notifications due to a breakdown in processes and over-reliance on technology without the oversight of a human actor. So effectively it is people relying on the technology, no human in the loop, And we can see that AI is going to increase the incidence of potentially these things happening, where the human will be further removed from the loop. So automated processes are only as good as your data underneath. And we've always argued that there is no point having automation when the quality of data is poor, because we know automation is just quality in, quality out. And so before AI is run over your data sets, as information and records officers, I think that there needs to be some degree of rigour and oversight of those data sets. I would not like to see an organisation just let AI loose on data without some kind of data control. Now, we all know that will take time, that will take money, and it really begs the question, is AI the right tool for that type of data and that kind of process? Just because it can be automated does not mean it should be, or that the risks can be mitigated by AI. So look, good records management is central to an agency's ability to meet their obligations under the FOI Act and the Privacy and Data Protection Act. The demand for access to public sector information, coupled with a reduced appetite for spending on record keeping systems, means that individuals undertaking good record keeping practices, and quite importantly, the offering of ongoing training, are fundamentals for keeping information open, protected, and categorised correctly. The Integrity and Oversight Committee, as I said, is reporting back on the FOI inquiry later this year. And with the emergence of AI, it's a pivotal moment for record keeping practices in the public sector. And I think now is a great time to be in records management. Not that every day isn't, but now is the time where anyone who's overseeing information in their organisation or a record keeping role, this is the time to have traction. It's maybe the only time to potentially make a case for funding or training from a risk-based perspective, and that's what we would recommend. I'd also like to remind everyone that OVIC does have some introductory training sessions on their website around, they're around FOI practices, but they also are around good information management. And we also have an information access series. They're free to everyone. You can go in and have a look. We've also got webinars on information privacy principles. And of course, PROV as the authority, their website is fantastic. Every time I get on there, it makes me ask more questions about our own record keeping practices. It was great when I was hearing about certain standards before and the numbers being wheeled out. I have no idea about those numbers, but our records manager at OVIC does. Look, and the final thought I'd say for record and information managers who are trying to gain traction with their organisation on funding and visibility for record keeping is that every year OVIC's annual report names organisations which have significantly breached the legislation we oversee, and these breaches are usually linked to poor records management. So there is a real world example of where if your organisation gets it wrong, unfortunately, name and shame is one of the few tools we have, and you can see your name up in lights in our annual report. I will just leave you with this. If you know the tragic tale of Oedipus Rex, well, just like the story of Oedipus Rex, where it was impossible for Oedipus to escape his tragic fate, regardless of what he did to avoid it, the same can be said of organisations that seek to comply with the law and try not to fall foul of it, yet fail to properly fund and resource records and information management functions. So your fate will be sealed if you don't adhere to proper record practices. I'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity today, and I really value the role that everyone does here. They're really a co-regulator with OVIC, and it's quite important work. Thank you. I apologise for my slide conduct too. I've usually got someone running the slides for me.
Thank you very much, Sean. That was fantastic to hear. Do we have any questions from the room? Oh, I'll start at the back here.
Thank you very much for your address. My name's David Bruce. I'm on the Public Records Advisory Council. Firstly, I'd just like to congratulate you as in your Office of Special Investigator role in terms of the speed by which the RDA was prepared. We have an oversight role in the preparation of RDAs, and compared to the VicPol RDA, which has taken several years to develop, it was a fantastic example of how something can be done effectively and efficiently. I just wanted to ask you in relation to the leadership that OVIC and PROV can show in relation to public sector agencies responding more efficiently and effectively to record management. And in particular, what role OVIC and PROV can play in terms of partnering with organisations such as the Secretaries Board and the Victorian Public Service Commission to ensure that the leadership processes which result in effective record management practice are implemented.
Thanks. On the first point, I won't comment on other agencies' tardiness or on their RDAs, but I will say that OSI was supported, and also we note that the council turned around those things quite quickly. So I think everyone involved from PROV made it quite easy because, you know, the time available to move those records was quite limited. But it was an eye-opening. I think maybe as an induction, everyone should have to go through a mini RDA process, maybe give them one box and 5 minutes to get out the door, and they won't all be categorised, of course. There'll be like records that shouldn't be there, etc. But it would be eye-opening for the ordinary public servant. On the leadership front, one of the things I'd like to do under my tenure at OVIC, and I'm supported by a great team, is to co-regulate. And so reaching out to PROV, we have our statement coming up. We are pushing to get on the VSB, but we are now looking for more guidance, and hopefully, you know, my role will be judged by how much traction we get, and that is more guidance for senior leaders and getting in front of potentially executive board meetings at certain agencies. I think that's the best way now, because record officers, talking to record officers or information managers, they know this back to front. They are telling everyone what they need to do, but it needs to be top down now. And we need to be a bit more pragmatic in that in a perfect world, there'd be one great information management system. It would all link into PROV. It would categorise things as it went to the relevant standard. It would destroy things automatically. There'd be 50 more people like you in the organisation, but the perfect world doesn't exist. So I think we have to be pragmatic as well to say, well, this is the information system you've got, and these are the minimum standards that we expect, and putting it through a risk framework. So I agree, we need to engage with the senior leaders next, and that's what OVIC should be judged on, but we'll definitely be leaning on PROV quite heavily and other regulators. The VPSC is a great example that we haven't reached out to yet, but I'll make some notes and go from there. So I appreciate it.
Got another question here.
My name's Roger Bewlett. Thanks, Sean, for those comments there, particularly the last few comments. In terms of engagement, will that involve invitations to public sector leaders to forums such as this, to get them all in one place to try to understand what their obligations are under the various pieces of legislation that require them to keep records? And I say this to have them at this point in time with the advent of AI, because AI is going to be in all our lives and impact all our lives if it hasn't done already, and to have public sector leaders attend forums such as this will put the stamp on the fact that they are responsible for their organisations in these matters?
Yes, look, I think it would be great to get public sector leaders to events like this, noting that my diary is full usually, and their diary is full, and it's not that this isn't important enough to take it out, but I think we need to bring it to them. I think it'd be great for them to come here, but now the onus is on organisations like OVIC to make it so easy to consume this information that there's no excuse. And that would be tailored one-on-one sessions, going to executive board, potentially getting to the Victorian Secretary's Board. It is, I think that potentially there's a barrier. Other people can do this on our behalf, but I think it is also, you make a good point, it is highlighting that they are the accountable individual. And just like with our information security, the attestation must come from the principal officer. They can't delegate it. I think maybe legislation could be updated that principal officer powers around records management can't be delegated. Now, it wouldn't make me the most popular person in town, or Justine, but it is about sheeting home accountability. And look, there are records management is important, and it's, again, best to take a pragmatic approach and understand that there are other pressing issues for agencies, you know, whether it's housing or health or things like this. So, but I think that connected to AI now is the crossroads for records management. If you have poor records management coupled with AI, you are going to be in a world of pain. But, you know, you'll have a great Spotify playlist or something like that. So.
Do we have someone down the front that wanted to?
Hi, I'm Rebecca Parker from V-Line. I have a question for you about tension that we're increasingly seeing between open access and our intention to make sure that information is as open and transparent as possible, and zero trust from cybersecurity. So how might we tackle those conflicting concepts so that we can continue to keep our information open, but also manage our risk within our organisations?
Could I ask, is the tension that providing access through a portal, for example, might be a way in, or is it around function creep that, do you know what their specific concern is?
I think for many of us, it'd be more around being quite reluctant to open up access to information within our organisations, and a tendency to overclassify as well in terms of protected.
Yes. Look, that is a tension. I think you'll find the Integrity and Oversight Committees, when they did interviews, they tried to draw out that tension between, well, if it's just open access, there'll be no space for commercial cabinet in confidence material, etc. So I think it comes back to that information improperly categorised creates it's all about risk. And I try to deal with around the cybersecurity issue, and what you're talking about is putting it back that the lack of open access creates a risk in that it exposes you to more FOI requests, it exposes you potentially to more criticism. The miscategorisation of records exposes you to risk because what it does is eventually you could be breaching the Public Records Act, for example, your obligations under that. You could be breaching the Public Administration Act as well, your obligations under that. And I think the miscategorisation of records will eventually, as soon as a regulator comes, it will be found out. There could be a compliance notice, there could be a name and shame in an annual report, but I think these tensions probably will exist and continue to exist till we get legislative reform. And I'm quite hopeful that if you look at OVIC's submission, all of this is available on the Integrity and Oversight Committee's website, that if we do get legislative reform, it creates a proactive release environment. All of these questions will dissipate. All of this resistance, because under law, it requires proactive publication. It requires proactive information assets registers. So at the moment, while it's not the best advice, I would say you need to frame it again around a risk perspective. But hopefully we can tread water till we get legislative reform. And I have said that if I don't get legislative reform during my 5-year term, I would consider it a failure. Even though it's out of my hands, I would consider this term a failure for me. So that's on the record in a number of places. I'll just put it out there again.
No questions online, but
Excellent.
we've got a lot of support for what you're saying, particularly in relation to resource management of records and privacy and FOI. I think people are feeling the pain out there and appreciate that you consider these things. Do we have one final question?
Final question. Thank you, Sean. Deirdre Missingham-Prack. Amongst all of the challenges that everybody faces are those of managing contracted service providers, Sean, and they have been a bit of a weak spot for many organisations this year. Could you perhaps give the group some tips on how best to manage those persons who provide services on behalf of government?
Wow. Have we got 2 hours? I will say that there have been some investigations that are on OVIC's website about poor performance of contracted service providers, and we've done some investigations into those poor practices. Our submission before the Integrity and Oversight Committee, and hopefully they're listening because the pressure's on, talks about making sure that documents of a contracted service provider are available under FOI, and that would bring in proper records management. But I think it comes back to records managers engaging with their legal teams and making sure that those contractual provisions bind them to the state's obligations. And they theoretically are meant to be bound by the information privacy principles and the information security standards and the record keeping standards to allow FOI if it can reach in around certain documents. So I think it comes back to having a conversation with your legal or compliance teams around the contracts. Now, I know they're only one method, but what usually happens when access is sought or there's an issue around records practices is that people go back to the contract and they find it's not sufficient. They put their hands in the air and say, there's nothing we can do. But I also think for people who are responsible for tendering and the commercial aspect is that they need to build into the value quotient, not just the price, but the value needs to consider the reputational damage to the organisation and how an organisation manages its information. I think that needs to be part of the value proposition. Audit, yes, audit would be fantastic. We know, again, with records management, audit is another area that's not under-resourced, but could profit from more resources. So we're relying on Vargo, for example. And I think this is a problem we're seeing is people have a management philosophy of as long as the regulator doesn't come, we're okay. And that's just such a poor philosophy. So, the way I equate it to is good records management should start now. And if I was a records officer, I'd be focusing on the next people through the door, because I'm not saying people in the organisation are a lost cause, but it's best to deal with the people coming through and start the best practice. You have to start somewhere. I think I've gone over time too, and I didn't mean to, so I blame the questions.
Thank you so much, Sean. I know there was a lot of interest in the room, and I know everybody appreciates hearing from you and particularly hearing, I guess, where your office is looking to focus in the future. And yes, I think we do need to continue our work trying to advocate for the areas that we focus on and for records management in particular. Okay, our next speaker today is Mary Neazor from the Environment Protection Agency. Mary's career spans both national and international arenas, starting with the New Zealand National Archives, then moving to the Victorian Public Service via the OECD and a UN International Tribunal. Currently, she is the Senior Information Management Officer at the EPA. Mary has a particular interest in the intersection of daily business and record keeping, with a focus on preserving information for future relevance and adapting records management to rapid technological advancements. Please, everybody, welcome Mary as she takes us on her journey to conquer records chaos.
Thank you. Well, I can't say EPA has conquered records chaos. These are just some ideas that we have found useful, that seem to resonate with our audience, with our stakeholders, and which you may find useful too. They're not system dependent, although I am talking about the system we use, Records 365. Now, just a quick word. I have actually given this presentation before at RIMPA. I was asked to give it here. It was felt the audience was largely different. But for anybody present or online who has heard this before, now is your chance. Sneak out for a quick vape and come back in 15 minutes. So, right. Quick background, probably something fairly similar has happened in a lot of your offices. This happened before I arrived on the scene. Office 365, as it was then called, introduced to EPA in 2013-14 on an initiative of IT. And it was introduced from the technical point of view. There seems to have been no governance, no team responsible for the implementation. At the time, the official records system was hard copy only. There was a single records manager, and EPA cycled through 3 of them in 5 years. Now, EPA was then a small organisation of about 300 people, administration and enforcement people based here in the CBD, and about 150 mad scientists banged up out at McLeod. So some users were very enthusiastic. They began to really get into this. They looked up videos on YouTube, they exchanged tips, and other people said, ooh, not sure about this. I have my files, or I have my network drives. I'll stick with that. It was kind of a matter of personal choice. And there seemed to have been, certainly since about the turn of this century, little in the way of a guiding framework or conventions, naming conventions, etc. So people were quite free to call the major folder Mary Stuff, and to give it 10 layers of subfolders. So in mid-2017, the information management team was set up in the IT division. By the way, as of yesterday, we have moved to the strategy division in a new data and insights office, which I think is quite interesting. And this was when I was brought in to head the team. It was set up on the initiative of the then CIO. Staff numbers have varied from 5 to 1.5, with me being the one. And I think that has quite often depended on whether or not IT budget was feeling the squeeze at the time. So we've just heard about resourcing issues. We know from resourcing issues. However, at the beginning, we were quite a large team, so we developed an information management framework. It included an updated retention disposal authority. Some of you may have worked with Emma Savage. She was the consultant we brought in. She engaged with the business, so this was not just an abstract thing that was handed down. We created a business classification scheme, again based on the terminology that people were really using, interviews across the business, drawing up a draft, then checking the draft. The enterprise taxonomy was created for us by Deloitte, who were in the picture, for a reason I'll explain shortly, it runs to 3,000 lines and was created again from intensive interviews with the business. So we regarded these as the essentials to begin with because they're technology agnostic, but they are the guiding principles set into all the technology. Now, the directive from the CIO was that any EDRMS we acquired, and EPA hadn't been using one till that time, must manage records in SharePoint. So in 2018, we chose Records 365, developed, of course, by an Australian company, Record Point. We did look at content, things like Content Manager 9 Xtrim. Unfortunately, it didn't play very nicely with SharePoint or M365 at that time. And the concept of the information management platform is SharePoint sites in which records are managed by Records 365. As you'll see there, and for a reason I'll explain in a minute, not all SharePoint sites are records managed. So we do have what you might call just pure SharePoint, which we take note of, but don't get actively hands-on about. These are the site categories. I won't go through them in detail, but very early on, we decided to create these categories again as a conceptual way of thinking about SharePoint rather than a huge, confused mass. So the function sites came out really of our work with the business classification scheme. And as you know, business and therefore records classification now concentrates on functions rather than following organisations, on the basis that functions persist, whereas organisational patterns often don't. And EPA loves nothing better than to restructure itself. If there's a year in which it hasn't restructured, it starts to feel itchy. So we said, look, if we have jammed everything into a single site, we will go crazy because we'll be constantly dismantling things and putting them together again. Chopping and changing. So the function sites as described there concentrate on a single function or sometimes a group of functions that are similar enough that the retention disposal schedules, which remember sit behind them through Records 365, can be consistently applied. We might sometimes throw project sites into this mix as well. Is there a project which is going to have a beginning, a middle and an end? Well, projects, of course, are usually concentrated on a single subject. And the idea is, as you'll see in the next slide, that the function is likely to keep on even if the organisational structure changes. And you'll see how we make this fairly easy to keep going through simple links in the navigation menu. Then we had administrative sites. We started out calling them team sites, and Bill Gates had the same idea. So admin sites are based on the organisation of EPA. They are for units, sometimes for divisions or other organisational groupings. Their content tends to be things like standard operating procedures, news, maybe some finance, maybe some HR, although of course we encourage people to manage those records in the proper systems, single source of truth, etc. Sometimes we do have managed access libraries in the administrative sites if, for example, there are joint managers who want to leave notes for each other in a library that not everyone has access to. But in general, the idea with administrative sites is they are visible by the whole organisation, although mostly, of course, it's read-only, whereas some function sites may have managed access because Our current legislation gives us, for example, very strong investigative powers, and not everybody should see those records even within the organisation. And on the right, we have the category of hub sites, and this is an example of the unmanaged SharePoint I talk about. This is something that's bubbled up from the business. Hubs act kind of like the shop window. They're the one-stop shop at, say, the level of a division, high-level organisational category, and it is, here are all our standard operating procedures, here are our policies, here are the things you should know about us, here's the latest, whatever, whatever. The point is, and they often have lots of bells and whistles, and they're colourful, and senior managers post updates on them, etc. The point is, they don't contain records. They are linked to records. The records are living in a function site or an administrative site where, of course, they're updated and the link to the most current version is posted to the hub, etc. So that's what I say when we take notice of the hubs, of course. They're part of the information ecology, if you like, but we are not necessarily very hands-on about them. And in fact, in the divisions which have got enthusiastic, you may find a team of, say, 3 people supporting the hubs as well as IT. Doesn't mean they do it full time, but they will have responsibilities connected to the hubs. So here's, oh, sorry, that's got a bit distorted, but hopefully an idea of what this looks like. You can see that these are discrete sites, but they are linked together, and it's usually just a link in the navigation menu on the left-hand side. An administration site at division level, for example, could be linked to quite a few function sites, as well as perhaps other administrative sites within the division. With a function site, it could be linked to, it's usually linked to a single admin site, but for a project, for example, you could have links to several administrative units because people do collaborate on projects. So the arrows are simply illustrations of this link. You can see a function site can be connected to a function site. Administrative sites can be connected to each other. And the point is, particularly with regard to keeping things fairly stable over time, we, for example, my team, information management, has just moved from IT to strategy. All we need to do is to change a link in our navigation menu to say, hey, this is the division we are now linked to. And yes, over time, some of the content of our site will change, but we don't have to pull the whole thing apart. And our function sites, and we have several, are simply linked to our administration site. So, as you can read, the government had introduced or signals its intention to introduce quite sweeping changes to the environmental law and to EPA's powers. The legislation was originally to be introduced in mid-2020. Thanks to the pandemic, it was pushed out. Really intensive business transformation, and there was an intense digital transformation. So we had, by that stage, got the concept of the platform. We had begun to pilot it, and then everybody went dashing off in 10 directions at once. And the organisation was expanding from 300 to 1,000 people in about 18 months. However, we did persist, and this, by the way, was where Deloitte came in. Deloitte were the delivery partners for the digital transformation, which meant that at times they had 100 staff working on the project, and we got an assigned group to work with us. So we got them to do all the grunt work. So Now moving to how we set up information management platform sites. We begin with an approach to or from a business unit. In the next 12 months, we'll have the opportunity to get more programmatic about the CPA's now settled down. So we'll be approaching people who've indicated interest, but also those in their area who will be good fits with them. Our first step, as you see, engage with the business owner, who's usually a reasonably senior manager. As we've heard, senior management need to be involved for things to really happen. And looking for a local champion or champions, there's usually somebody who's been champing at the bit saying, if only we could, it would be more logical too. Yes, you are the person we want to engage. Giving stakeholders a stake. So engaging the whole team, because again, as we've just heard, records management, record keeping is everybody's responsibility. It's only going to work if everybody is engaged, same as information security. So getting people into planning the sites, we often ask if we can take a chunk of a standard team meeting so people aren't pulled out of their usual routine. And we get them into things like naming conventions, how would you search for this, what do you need to report on? Yep, we've got metadata. And once people grasp the concept, and metadata is a scary word when you first hear it, they often get really into it, and there are passionate arguments. But they boil down to what works. I mean, one team decided their functional documents needed a single metadata field, but it was the critical one. So moving on from there, our policy, as you can see, records are evidence of business. So the discussions on records, this is where people begin to connect it with real life, if you think. Because when you say records, people often have a mental image of records are files, which are dusty things in dusty basements. And somebody occasionally brings them up to you. But when we start to say, okay, what document libraries do you want to have, what document sets, and then the metadata, do you pick up metadata from the business processes? They start to see how it connects. And sometimes people start to rearrange how they keep records. They say, well, actually, it would be more logical to have this set of document sets, not this set of folders. By the way, we severely discourage folders. In fact, we have fiendish plans to turn them off in IMP sets. We'll just use document sets instead. So again, all part of this engagement. Again, as we try to provide help and support, we do have good examples. So with consent from the teams, we show people what they have done. And that's kind of like saying, hey, this is not rocket science. You know, the industry guidance unit has done it. You can do it too. I hope that we'll be able to start a community of practice at some time in the next 12 months. And very much like to have a space for peer-to-peer discussion, because when we appear, well, we try to speak in plain English, but we do talk records management jargon a bit. We're the subject matter experts, of course, nothing is difficult for us. We don't have to do the real hard work at the coalface. If you get people having the conversations between themselves, within a team and between teams, there are lots of good suggestions, and actually, if you're lucky, you wind up finding that your stakeholders are doing about 50% of the work for you. And it seems to generate more enthusiasm, buy-in. So again, seguing a bit into the support we offer, this is a snip of the icons on our information management support site. It's one of our function sites. You can see it goes from the policies through things like BCX taxonomy and naming, and it includes SharePoint help. EPA still does not really have a dedicated SharePoint team, and IT, we've kind of become the de facto SharePoint people. And my information management officer, Paul Poulos, who unfortunately can't be with us today, is really a wizard. So here are our training topics. These all arise from questions we were really asked by users. We didn't take them from Microsoft. These are not things we thought up ourselves. And our approach is no such thing as a stupid question. Some people said to us, how do I find SharePoint? This after SharePoint had been in use at EPA for about 7 years. They had never known, they were worried about asking because they thought they looked stupid, and they had never spotted that on the intranet page, there is that link to SharePoint. So that's the first question on our site. Once you can get in there, then you can start doing stuff. Our best friends, public affairs branch, really about getting across to people, making sure our communications attract attention, get the message across. We are talking the way real people talk, making the language vivid and active, and I may say public affairs have really come to the party. We work mainly with 1 or 2 people there, but they are great. And then, of course, information security is part of IT. So we were immediate colleagues, but we intend to stay talking to each other very regularly. Privacy, we did have a privacy manager who was really founding the function at EPA. She and I and the information security people worked closely together. And there were many full and frank discussions, as I say, about how open and transparent should information be. Our information security people can be quite fierce about need to know, and us saying, well, yes, but don't people need to know a fair amount about what's going on in the organisation to do their jobs? And yes, I think we are minimising the gaps. There was recently a data breach, an inadvertent one. I won't say where, and it wouldn't have toppled the government had it come out, but information management, information security and privacy all work together on it, and yes, we reported to OVIC. And in doing that, we had, it concerned an external organisation as well. We were able to give them a very comprehensive response to what we were doing, the information we had sent to people and so on. So that's it basically. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mary. I think you've shown us that you've done a lot in terms of conquering records chaos, so well done. We'll take a couple of questions. We are running a little over time, but if there's any questions, burning questions, yep.
Hi, Mary. I'm Rachel Bogmache from DPC Cabinet Office. I've just got a question for you regarding the SharePoint system. Do you see in the future, like cabinet in confidence information being like stored in SharePoint, or how do you see the way forward for, you know, as like content manager being phased out into new record management systems?
Well, in fact, we do store some cabinet and confidence information in SharePoint sites, but we do get the word out about managing access. In fact, we have just published on the SharePoint basic site I showed you 2 guidelines about managing access to the intermediate level. We don't get very fancy. And in fact, during the election period of a couple of years ago, we sequestered cabinet and confidence information in a dedicated SharePoint site. And we've managed to move it out of there when the government was re-elected. So it can be done. You do need to educate people about managing permissions. They do need to set the sensitivity level appropriately. But yep, it can happen.
We've got another one over here.
Thanks. Kate Gorham from Education. Two questions. When you've got your functionally admin sites with the hub, is that done in the background within SharePoint Online? As in, is it an actual hub, which is, in the template in the back end? Or because there's no sites and sub-sites in SharePoint Online, how are you making that connection between those? And if I did a search at the admin site, would it search the admin site and those functional sites for content?
The site search, unless people have done something very clever within their teams, is specific to that site. Although you can, of course, do a whole of SharePoint search, and you would see everything you are entitled to see.
Yes.
You wouldn't see anything that you're not supposed to. In terms of the hubs, they're just standard SharePoint sites that are called hubs.
Right, so they're not a hub as in the technical hub in the back end of SharePoint?
No,
that was
they're shop windows, as I say.
And just the other part, have you considered Microsoft Teams in relation to how you set up SharePoint with the fact that each Teams site has its own SharePoint Online site, or you've not moved into the Teams environment yet for that?
At the moment, we're not moving into the Teams, but yes, we are bearing that in mind. And we, as I said, we're very conscious of single source of truth and the fact that, well, M365 was designed to be very rubbery and all-encompassing and collaborative. We have been asked to consider Teams channels, and our resident SharePoint wizard said, "Ooh, there are problems with that." Particularly
I love it,
around.
you see. So I'm an advocate for Teams and SharePoint, but we've still got our own challenges as well. Yeah.
So as part of our governance, and we are I'm part of a group currently setting a governance framework in place. We may have to do some artificial boundary setting and say, this is to be used for this, this is to be used for that. We will succeed if we make it easy to use them.
Thank you.
If there are any other questions, feel free to do one last one.
Hi, my name's Karen. I'm from Vic Roads. How have you tackled the retention and disposal sort of areas? Because you didn't really show that. Is that purely through your Records Point add-ons, or is that at all through SharePoint itself?
Well, SharePoint's not really very good at retention disposal. We did, PROV did host a seminar on implementing Purview, either earlier this year or later last year, but you need to have the internal resources to do that. So at the moment, to really make Purview work, so at the moment we're just using Records 365. Although we do have a substantial collection of hard copy records, so we're also obviously applying the RDA there. But as I say, hopefully this is system agnostic. Some of these principles could be applied no matter what you were doing.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions online, but we might, I'll get you to respond and we'll keep moving on.
Thank you so much, Mary. Very interesting, and I know a lot of people are tackling records whilst working with 365 and trying to work out how to do that gracefully and cheaply. Always a consideration. So thank you for that. Very enlightening. We're going to take a break for morning tea now. I'm going to ask people to be very disciplined about their morning tea and only take 20 minutes because we are running a bit late. So if I can have you all back here at 11:45, that would be fantastic. And for those of you online, we can't send food through the screen. Afraid the scientists have not invented that yet. But we will be setting up a breakout area. So if you want to have a chat to the other people who are attending online, you can do that. So we'll be back at about 11:45. So thank you. Welcome back, everybody, to the second half of our Records Management Network event. Our next speaker is maybe familiar to you because they hail from PROV. So our next speaker is Xander Hunter, with a background that includes a Bachelor of Arts with honours in Anthropology from La Trobe University, followed by a Master of Information Management and Systems from Monash University. Xander's been working at PROV since 2002. Throughout their tenure, they have played a crucial role in developing and implementing standards, policies and guidance to support government agencies. And I've heard had very good responses to recent guidance that they've developed around AI. Had a lot of compliments about that, so well done. They have a passion for public service and dedication to the field of records management and archiving, which is evident in the impactful policies and guidance products that they produce. So please join me in welcoming Xander as they share their insights into the complexity of records management and the development of new policies and guidelines.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Xander, and the people on screen at the moment were instrumental in the way that we manage records today. We have Hilary Jenkinson, Theodore Schellenberg, and the Verus Centre of Excellence team from some time ago. The people on screen were instrumental in doing certain concepts, certain approaches, certain methodologies and certain techniques, which has really withstood the test of time. Things like ensuring that records are described in context of the business that they were created within and used within so that they retain their integrity, their usability, their reliability, and their authenticity over time. The techniques involved with records appraisal so that we know what records we need to be creating and capturing, how long we need to make sure that we're keeping them for, and making sure that we're disposing of them appropriately. And understanding the impact technology has on both of those areas. Because if we don't understand the impact of technology, we're not going to be able to do either of the other two. I wanted to touch on the Cynefin framework before I move on to the policy space. The Cynefin framework is a framework, it's a policy framework for understanding complexity. And it was intended for leaders and decision makers, essentially in order for them to understand what kind of solutions, what kinds of risks, what kind of policies they need to be focusing on for a particular space. Now, this particular table comes from Appendix C of the IMAP report for 2021-22. IMAP stands for the Information Management Maturity Assessment Program. And when I was looking at the results that were coming in for this post-COVID set of assessments, what really struck me was how everything was in the complex line. We had all of these different multiple systems. We had software as a service. We had Microsoft 365. We had different professional disciplines, not just records management, but information management, knowledge management, and data management servicing. People were still using hard copy records. People were still using EDRMSs, but they were sitting amongst all of this other space. The complex domain under the Cynefin framework is the domain of emergence. It has 5 domains: best practice, the domain of experts, the domain of emergence, the domain of chaos, and disorder, which is where you're not sure what the rest of it is. So if we're focusing on the domain of emergence, one of the emerging technologies that we have right now is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence technologies is an umbrella term. It incorporates automation, machine learning, large language models. It incorporates generative AI. It incorporates whatever tomorrow's new thing is in this space that we don't have a name for yet. There are a number of risks associated with AI, and there are a number of challenges around those risks that we're still trying to understand and still trying to figure out the best way of addressing. The thing is, with these different types of AI, they're all very different. They operate in different ways. They do different things. No one type of AI is the same as another type of AI. Which is why we decided we really needed to make sure that there was a policy and a topic page covering artificial intelligence and record keeping. The thing I wanted to focus on primarily with this policy was to ensure that full and accurate records were being created and kept. Looking at the AI tech space, the ethical AI principles were universally being promoted as a way to ensure that AI remained trustworthy. Because one of the biggest challenges when it comes to AI is that because it can produce hallucinations, because it can produce bias and perpetuate bias, the public has a little bit of an arm's length approach to it. So by making sure that we're keeping and creating full and accurate records, we can help to ensure that the ethical principles of accountability, of explainability, and of transparency are addressed. After all, record keeping addresses all three of those. So the policy goes over things like what can and can't the AI access, because that's important. If we're using a particular tool that is limited to what's in our agency, we could have more leeway with that than if we're using something like ChatGPT, which is going to be putting the data into a more public field. So we need to be aware of that. Why are we using the AI? What are we using it for? That's also very, very important, because if somebody asks the agency a question, we need to know what kind of impact the AI tool has had on the answer to that question. After all, whatever the AI tool produces is essentially the agency producing. Whatever the AI tool is saying is the agency saying. So we need to make sure that we have all our ducks in a row so that we can say this particular AI tool did this thing in this way and it contributed in this particular way to this action or this decision. We need to make sure we understand the risks that are associated with the specific AI technology that we are implementing in the agency. We need to understand it in relation to bias, in relation to intellectual property, in relation to incorrect content. What kind of incorrect content might be there and how are we addressing it? How are we making sure that whatever the AI tool is producing is accurate? And one of the things that I've noticed that has a potential for inaccuracy is the automated transcripts for meetings and jargon. Just think about it. How many accents are in your organization? What kind of jargon are you using in your organization? And how accurately is your AI tool capturing that? It also aligns it with PROV standards and PROV specifications and guidance material. The topic page, on the other hand, is designed to try and help you figure out what kind of things you need to document and how you need to document them. So there are various tables associated with the types of AI, with the risks, with ethical principles for AI, and the kinds of records you might want to think about creating and capturing to address those. There are also an assortment of tools from across the globe that are wonderful when it comes to documentation. There is a particular template for documenting algorithms, for example, that comes from the United Kingdom. There is a guideline from the Alan Turing Institute on explainability that really drills down into how you would explain a single data instance. There's the NIST playbook from the United States, which goes over the various stages of AI implementation, the kind of actions and documentation that you need to keep for those particular actions. And building on that, there's a paper from Berkeley University on trustworthiness that just extends that so that you can make sure that you're demonstrating that your AI tool is trustworthy. A question we really need to revisit is, what is a public record? And a public record is any record created or received by a public officer in the course of their duties. Why do we need to revisit this question? Because people have this association with the word record that limits it to hard copy, when we all know that it is much broader than that. Why do we need to focus on created and received? Because people are starting to have an idea that ownership trumps custody, for example, because various theories from other professional disciplines, such as data management, which is often based on the US way of seeing record keeping, are influencing the way that things are being managed in Victoria. The definition of record under the Public Records Act is extremely broad. You can see it in the dot points on this slide. It includes all sorts of things, including anything from which sounds, images, or writings can be reproduced with or without the aid of anything else. And what that means is that data, all data, is a public record under the Public Records Act, and it must be managed in accordance with PROV standards. So the data and record keeping policy says essentially that. It reminds people that the Public Records Act is technologically neutral. It applies regardless of the medium or the format used. It also reminds people that data must be retained in line with the appropriate retention and disposal authority and disposed of lawfully in line with an keeper-issued authorization for disposal. If people are not doing that, then you're placing your agency at risk of breaching not only the Public Records Act, but the Crimes Act. The data topic page, we've tried to be very basic with the topic page and just go over things like the difference between a record and a full and accurate record or good record. Under the Public Records Act, Section 13, it's very specific about the kinds of records that agencies need to be keeping. That particular section relates to the responsibilities for the head of a public office. It includes that they must ensure that full and accurate records of the agency business are being created and kept. So we're pointing to the standard PROS 1905, Create, Capture, Control Standard, Principle 1, Requirement 1. That's where you need to start with what is a full and accurate record. Metadata schemes. There are various metadata schemes that we use in record keeping that data managers will need to know. Preservation formats. The CAD format is specifically designed for databases. We also have VERS for all digital records. Disposal of data. Normal administrative practice includes disposal of some database data. Otherwise, there are relevant RDAs, and you'll find more information on the topic page. And we've also linked to various things on data sharing because our partner agencies work in the data sharing space, and we also have a link to OVIC for data protection and privacy. These are our policies at the moment. You can sort of see the list here on screen. Please take note of approval processes policy. You will find that that includes automation and machine learning. Please take notice of backup technology and records management policy. Some backups may be destroyed under NAP, but others you need to manage very carefully. If they're the only place where certain records are being stored, then they need to be managed in accordance with PROV standards. Do check out the business systems policy. Any record in any business system must be managed. There are some people who seem to think that the only records that need to be managed are ones in a formal records management system, which of course is not the case. So the business systems policy covers what you need to know there. To check out the cloud services policy. It's brand new, and if you have questions, Marianne will be able to answer them because she wrote it. Data and record keeping policy we've covered. Mobile technologies is the one that's going to be reviewed this financial year. It's going to be moving into an enterprise mobility policy. We're also doing social media this year as well. And the value and risk policy exists so that you can tailor things, because we know you can't resource everything. And so with the value and risk policy, high value, high risk stuff should be handled first, and then once you've got a handle on that, you can do the rest of it. We also have a wide range of topic pages, and not everything makes it to a policy. For example, we have a cybersecurity topic page which talks about record keeping in relation to cybersecurity. We have a page on decommissioning, on migration of records, on procurement, including sourcing and contract management. There's the new cloud services and computing topic page, and also one that we've had for a little while now on Microsoft 365, which probably needs updating. And otherwise, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or hopefully I ran early.
Fantastic, thanks, Xander. If people online want to pop any questions into the chat, I'll happily share them. Otherwise, do we have any in the room at the moment?
Thanks so much. With everything associated with AI, how do you feel about the fact that it could become sentient? And that's, I know that's been out there and it's been asked by many, many people, including developers as well. I've had a little bit of experience myself. I've used Copilot and asked it a number of questions associated with AI, and I asked them that question, whether Microsoft is intending it to become sentient, and it shut me down.
Basically, I'm focused on the records side of AI technology. If it became sentient, it would be just like any other member of the public service, and every member of the public service needs to ensure that full and accurate records of the business are being maintained. They need to make sure that they are, in terms of record keeping, acting with integrity and with accountability and transparency in their actions by making sure that full and accurate records are being maintained. So they'd be like any other member of the public sector.
Very interesting, because that proposes the question, if based on information that anybody puts in any system, let alone public offices, and AI becomes sentient, it can make that decision and give that decision to you, and you wouldn't be aware of it unless the system itself could flag something, and I very much doubt that. And therein lies the problem with AI.
Basically, AI can already create records, do actions on those records, and make decisions on those records and act on those decisions. So AI can already do that. And as to what we know about where AI is, there are black box products, and you don't really know what happens inside a black box product. And there are products that use AI and they don't say so. So we will only really know if we drill down and decide very consciously what kind of AI we're going to be using. And if we drill down very consciously through the technologies we are currently using and ensure that we have a full understanding of what that technology is and does.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, that was really interesting. You mentioned some tools, but they weren't on the screen. Like you had the template for documenting algorithms, trustworthiness. Oh, yes. Do you have a list of those at all, or where we could just find them?
If you go to the AI topic page, you'll find down the bottom, there'll be a list of tools. They're also on the side of the page under resources.
Great, thank you so much.
See if our online participants have anything. Okay, so there's one here. Who oversees the AI? Another AI.
Potentially.
Yeah. Yep. Any other questions from the room? I think we're good.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Xander. Okay, I don't think we are going to see Skynet anytime soon. I do have a degree in IT somewhere in my background, and I think we're very far away from sentience. Okay, our final speaker today is actually speakers, because we are having a panel. So we've had an exciting lineup of industry specialists who have kindly volunteered to share their experiences of implementing Microsoft 365 and managing records. Each of our panel will speak for a few minutes to provide some insight into their implementation project, the biggest challenges and the greatest lessons that they've learned. And this will be followed by an extended Q&A session to give you an opportunity to ask questions. So I will introduce our speakers, and I think I will introduce all of them and then ask the first speaker to come forward. So our first speakers today are Sharon Ibsen and Ben Harvey. They are from the Victorian Electoral Commission, and Sharon is a technology advocate and has spent a decade in the Victorian government in roles focusing on records and information management. She's currently at the Victorian Electoral Commission, and she drives innovation in managing information within the Microsoft 365 environment, prioritising user-centric solutions that add value to the business. Ben is a records and information manager with over 18 years in the public sector, specialising in digital-first records management. He collaborates with colleagues and industry experts to develop native records management solutions within the Victorian Electoral Commission's Microsoft 365 environment. Following on from that, we will hear from Sue Klein. Sue has over 30 years in records and information management, and she is now at the Victorian Department of Parliamentary Services. She specialises in transitioning organisations from traditional to modern information management practices, employing diverse software solutions. Her latest project integrates managing records practices using SharePoint and Teams and Records Point, enhancing process efficiency and outcomes through comprehensive change adoption strategies. And our final panel member will be Christy D. Christy is from the Suburban Rail Loop Authority. Christy has a diverse background history with a 20+ years experience as a registered nurse in a variety of clinical and non-clinical roles, and nurses, of course, do create lots of records. She took a leap in a new direction and has been working in the Victorian Public Service for the past 7 years and at the State Suburban Rail Loop Authority for the past 5. Christy is passionate about educating and enabling others to practice good record keeping principles and has a deep interest in learning and evolving good record keeping practices and standards in the digital world. So can I welcome all of our panellists, but our first speakers, Sharon Ibsen and Ben Harvey.
Hi, thanks for having me today. So I am going to start off about when VEC first implemented M365 as a information records management solution. So our organisation is quite small. It's got 278 people, I believe, at this point in time, at least full-time ongoing. And these people are really, really passionate about the information they create because it's part of delivering the elections for Victoria. So we deliver state elections every 4 years, and then also local government elections, which some of you are probably knowing are coming up right now. So in 2020, it was decided, it was planned that we would move to M365 as our records management solution. So this wasn't done in relation to COVID. It was planned. We had migration strategies. We had information architecture. We had planned how we were going to move out of HPRM, which we had at the time. And we had brought a third-party tool. And this was going to be our solution. It was going to roll out. It was going to be fantastic. Now, it came to rollout, came to delivery, and while it was functional, it worked, and it wasn't so bad, it wasn't actually what we were after. So users weren't having the same kind of experience that they'd had before. They weren't happy with the experience they were having. The information architecture didn't really support the way they worked. The third-party tool, unfortunately, didn't support all aspects of how we manage information at the VEC. So we create about 7 kilometres of records per election event. That's quite a lot. For 12 months, we have to manage a certain number of those and then they can be destroyed. We have to know exactly where they are just in case there's an investigation. So the tool didn't really meet that requirement for us, and it just made it really difficult to do our jobs. There were issues with permission management. It was confusing for end users. So we had to look at how we were going to move on from that. So in 2022, I started at the VEC and I brought Ben along for the journey. And I'm going to hand over to him to talk about what we did next when we got a tool that we weren't quite happy with.
We chucked it out. That's the simple version. So basically, the manager of our information and knowledge management team at the time, who some of you will know, it was Carolyn Hartman, she made a really tough decision, which was basically we are going to move away from that third-party tool. We took it out and we started managing our records natively in SharePoint. Now, a lot of people go, oh no, that sounds dangerous. What are you doing? Is it even working? Are you able to manage your records? So this has been a long, ongoing process. We're not there yet. We're not finished, but we have come a really long way in this space. We're basically able to manage the vast majority of our electronic records within SharePoint natively. One of the big lessons learnt that we had as a result of this, and I will preface this by saying if you are in an organisation that uses Cenetex as your shared service provider, the information I'm about to give you is going to be damn near useless. But the the big thing that we had, the big advantage that we had is VEC needs to be an independent organisation, so we have our own internal IT department. That means that we were able to get access to Purview to see the back end. Now, my access, for example, as the information manager is somewhat limited. I have read-only access, but that means that I'm able to go in and see our full list of SharePoint sites. I'm able to see our labels and policies that exist, and I'm able to get insight into the back-end workings of how our SharePoint environment and our broader M365 environment and our team sites and all that sort of stuff is actually working and how it all ties together. So we can then approach our IT area and get more advice, get more assistance. As Sharon touched on before, we do also have a really good information management culture within the VEC. So we have a culture where our staff know that if they have questions, they come and talk to the information management team. Now that can be something really, really difficult to achieve, particularly if you're in a large organisation. But if you are able to get yourselves out there, make yourselves more visible and make it easier for people to come to you for advice, it starts to have a trickle-on effect and you start to have more situations where people feel comfortable talking with you about their requirements. And being a small organisation, we also have the advantage of whenever somebody wants to create something new in either SharePoint or Teams, we have a very controlled environment. So if somebody wants to request a new hub, site or document library, they have to come through our IT area. They have to put in a service desk request to get that created. And then service desk comes and talks to us. And they say, hey, have you spoken with them? Do you approve this? Does this meet with your requirements? They've asked for a restricted site, for example. Does that meet the security model? And we're able to go and have discussions with the business and make sure that it's all working. So we're still working towards making it fully meet all of our requirements. We do have what we've termed a SharePoint site register, so we have a full listing of all the SharePoint sites and libraries that exist in our environment, so that we can start to manage those from a records perspective. But because there are quite a few, we are taking that high value, high risk approach, focusing on our permanent and high risk records first, and then starting to move on to those other ones. We also are basically in a situation where we do create a lot of physical records every 2 years. So we have local government, 1 2-year period, state government elections, another 2-year period. So the tool that we had originally implemented for managing physical records wasn't working, so we actually pulled all of our physical record registrations out of SharePoint and put them back into HPRM, which we are still temporarily using as our physical records management solution, but my big ticket project over the next 18 months is to get us out of that. We want to ideally be in a situation where we are primarily using a similar platform for all of our records. I'm not going to say, hey, we're going to go with a Microsoft solution, because we might not, but that's the kind of direction we're going, is to modernise it and bring it forward, because we want to make it as easy for our end users as possible, and keeping that end user experience front of mind is something that will really benefit you going forward if you're moving into this space.
Over to Sue Klein.
Thank you. Oops. Display. Can't get it. Thank you. Sorry, bit of a technical problem there. We've been, well, first of all, I'll introduce myself. I work for the Parliament of Victoria, and in one of the 3 departments that forms the Parliament of Victoria, which is the Department of Parliamentary Services. We cover all of the administrative activities that you would find in an organisation, such as finance, payroll, HR, property services, all of the ones that you would have in any organisation. When I started with the Department of Parliamentary Services about 4 years back, there was no records management unit or a records manager. So we started at a very low level. And in the last 4 years, we've introduced governance to a certain degree. We've introduced using SharePoint and Teams. We've rolled it out across the organisation within the Department of Parliamentary Services. And we have started to use RecordPoint, which is our product, or R365, as it's sometimes called, for in-the-place document management, records management, archiving. So, since we started to use Microsoft 365, and that's SharePoint Teams that we've used, there have been a number of changes in SharePoint and Teams over a 4-year period. For instance, when we started and looked at SharePoint and Teams, Teams didn't have metadata. Nowadays, it does. So we had, at the time, made a decision to use SharePoint as our user interface. But if we were doing it today, we might use Teams. But so we have at the moment got some areas that we're using SharePoint and some that are now using Teams. Prior to my coming to the organisation, the IT area had rolled out SharePoint Teams. That was in about 2019, but they had a very low user uptake. A lot of the areas afterwards said to us, oh, they don't even remember any training, but I am assured there was training on SharePoint. It's just people didn't use it till COVID happened. I started with the organisation 2 months before COVID happened, so it was very hard in those first year and a bit to get anybody's attention, because their attention was fully on just trying to do their daily work.
But that gave me an opportunity to start to learn about SharePoint and Teams. I came to the organisation with no understanding of SharePoint or Teams. I'd never even seen it. During the rollout, I ended up providing the training for it. So it was a quick uptake. What would I do nowadays if I knew a bit more about SharePoint and Teams is I might have set it up a bit differently. I would have set it up a bit differently with the first few areas that we rolled it out to. But by the end of the process, we had it down to very set, organised templates that we provided, training we provided, presentations that we provided, etc. So we set that all up. So what can I tell you about it? The usage has grown over a time. Why is everybody using this solution? Well, I believe it's because it's IT, it's part of that standard Microsoft package. So it makes it cheaper for organisations to actually use it. They don't have to usually get an additional person who's the administrator for whatever product. They usually have somebody in their system if they've already got SharePoint or Teams that is a SharePoint expert. It's pretty standard, and of course it has very good integration with any of the other Microsoft products. So those are some of the main reasons that you have it. Records managers, especially in the last few years back, were not keen on going over to Microsoft. I think that's changing nowadays. It's recognised that many organisations are moving to that. It's not to say that it is possibly the best solution. We'll have to wait possibly a few years to find out what the result of that is, but that's the movement now. Common issues. Well, it was rolled out during the pandemic, so we of course had to fight for everybody's attention. Record management practices weren't embedded. There was no records management practices in the organisation. Some teams had very good ones, but those were localised to their area and other teams didn't. So you would, as you would expect, possibly finance and HR were a bit better in some parts, and in other parts of the organisation it wasn't. Lack of knowledge about SharePoint and Teams, not only amongst the users, but amongst the records management staff. So what we've got is this sort of structure, and this was one of the documents we provided to the areas when we were going through that business analysis stage, which we pointed out what were the usages for each one, what was the likelihood that they would be requiring one of these, and what was the access and permission rights. So on the far left we have site usage, why we would use a particular site. In the middle is the library, and folder usage. We acknowledge that folders weren't a good practice. Metadata is better. You can get various views using metadata. The way I always explained it was a bit like sorting on an Excel spreadsheet using the various functionality you can find in the filters to get different views. But people, of course, are so prefer folders. That's what they knew. So it's a bit of an uphill fight there. So we don't have there is the hub site, which we do use for the functions. So when I say a hub site is really just another site, but you don't, as was said earlier, you don't actually have any documents sitting in the hub site, nor do you have any documents sitting in the site. So those are just ways of organising your information. You may or you may not apply security at that level. If you do apply security, everything that sits underneath has to have the same security access controls. So at the site level, we have got navigation, design, the look and the feel of the product, how they see it, if you want to apply certain colours, etc. Then the information management across the environment. So what sits underneath it. Permissions can be set at this level, but we generally try to avoid it. Of course, you do try to set your permissions at the highest level to make it easier. The frequencies of sites was lower in comparison to libraries. So you have a hub site, which might be your functions, HR, finance, etc. This was the model we used. You can use other models. Underneath it was the sites, which were the major processes that was the major element, and then the libraries, and underneath those were folders. Unfortunately, folders are pretty well uncontrollable in the Microsoft environment. People can do what they like. They can set up folders. So you want to try and move everything up because you have a bit more control at the upper levels. To give you an example, I hope you can see that it's a little bit small, but that was one of our models that we had. It's for the finance area. So at the top we have finance, and then sitting underneath it are the various processes or major activities, as we would call it, in the records management world. We tried to, of course, stick away from words like function, activities with staff, because that's not their language. So we looked at what we call major processes that a particular area was doing. The yellow ones are the sites, and the blue ones are the libraries. And what we also had was, when we provided these sort of images to areas, was if it was a secure one, it had a red outline. So that meant secured. All of these, in this case, were secured because it was finance and there was a lot of information in there that was needed to be protected. We also have, sitting underneath, and that's just because of the way our organisation works, we also had risk management and payroll, finance-related activities. So, some learnings that we had. Change management is very important, as with any larger project. It doesn't matter what it is. Change management is important. So that communications, wish we had been able to do a bit more communication. We actually ended up with a staff of 2 people doing the full rollout, which was very time consuming. I must admit, but we had IT. Our SharePoint support came from IT. That was the structure. We initially started with an external organisation, but providing us with support in the rollout and the design. But unfortunately, they lost all of the staff in their project in a pretty quick time frame, and they weren't able to hire knowledgeable staff, so we just got rid of them. So other learnings are that you will need to have several tools or apps in your solution to probably provide you with all of the things that you need. So unlike an EDRMS where you've got one product and that's it, you're going to probably end up using a number of products. And that's where the difficulties often start. Picking the right product, learning about how to use it, working out which product is the best for what usage, because Microsoft often has a number of products that do very similar things. Take a minimalistic approach if you can. That's one of the most important things we found. We found it very hard to make changes at a global level in Microsoft for some things. If you, for instance, set security, you had to do it at the lower levels to put it on in some cases and remove it. There's nothing like you would find in an EDRMS system where you can do a lot of global changes at that global level. You have to do it at a lower level. And as in my case, you might have to resort to the IT area to do it. And then they're doing other things as well. So it's quite time consuming. It's a complex process, so you need to have it very well mapped out. And there are a few others, but I'm conscious of the time, so I'll just move on a bit. And the last one is some of the issues, and that's what we'll probably be talking about now. Data quality will remain inconsistent until adoption of better tools, and at architecture that means it's easier to manage information. I don't know if Microsoft is the best solution or if you need to have other tools sitting with it or go on to something else. That, like the BEC, we're starting to look at. That's one of our next activities, to go back to the drawing board and have a look. And I think with any sort of rollout or anything that you've got in place, every few years you should be going back and looking at, can we improve it? SharePoint Teams does not facilitate a centralised structure. That was the first thing I had to get over, that big hurdle coming from an EDRMS system in my previous organisation, where I wanted something centralised and then I could go down to drill down to different things. Microsoft doesn't work that way. Microsoft wasn't designed to be a records management system, and that's part of the fundamental problem with using this set of tools. It wasn't designed for what we're trying to do. Square peg, round hole, or other way round, you're not going to get it in too well. And a lack of reporting tools. Possibly now that we've just got access to Purview, which we only got about a week back in my case, we might be able to resolve that. But at the moment, for instance, we have to ask for reports from our IT area, and we don't always get priority. So for instance, we had to wait a few weeks to get our report of all the SharePoint sites and team sites that we have, so we could actually start to apply disposal schedules to those. And as you can guess, there are quite a few. So that's about it, conscious of time, so I will hand it over. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. And now, sorry, thank you, Sue. Our final speaker is Christy. So, Christy.
Thank you. So I'm Christy Day. I'm from the Suburban Rail Loop Authority. A lot of common themes in a lot of the things that we've experienced over the last 5 years. So I've come across from other government organisations into Suburban Rail Loop at the inception, and we were probably in the unique position to be able to start with not much, not a huge legacy of records, and we were able to go into a digital world quite quickly with that. We also came across into Suburban Rail Loop at a time when there was a big machinery of government change. There was an election. We had DJPR at the time and DOT at the time separate from Digitar, and then SRLA became born, if you like. So we had an evolving organisation that went from non-digital records into digital records, from 20 people into what we are today, 650 core staff. And we had a record system through Microsoft products that is centralised, and it is a challenge to maintain centralised access and control on Microsoft products with a growing and upscaling of your organisation, is one thing that big feedback. So we did do an implementation of these products, and we did use multiple other applications to support that overall governance of our records keeping system. We use Teams as our front facing for records government. So we're a little bit different to the others. We use predominantly SharePoint. Teams is our front facing for a variety of reasons, but to support that collaborative feature of Microsoft products, to encourage our users to use the functions of Microsoft to collaborate and work together. We have implemented our next phases, which include Record 365. At this stage, we're only implementing Records 365 on SharePoint and Teams. We haven't implemented our other systems that we collect records on, like our information exchange systems and VicGov people and all of those. And we are in our review stage. So we are 3.5, 4 years down the track, and we are at a position where is it still doing what the end user needs it to do? And does a centralised model still work for the organisation, considering the classification of where a lot of our information now sits? So when we initially started, we started with an organisation that had quite highly sensitive parts of the project, and a lot of information was kept quite well, or boundaries around it. And we're now in a position where we're in the delivery phase, and that part of the project has now changed. So we are looking at whether that fit for purpose at the time it has now evolved. So that is the next part of our project, is continually looking at how we can support and implement good record keeping across a growing organisation, how we can support our end users to be as passionate as we are about good record keeping, and especially going into another election in 18 months, 2 years, how we can, not get to that finish line in 2 years and be concerned about how we're supporting our records. So I think we're in a good and unique position to implement a lot of the learnings and taking from a lot of the learnings of our colleagues. But I would definitely say that if this is your opportunity to start a new project, planning, good governance tools, and good understanding of the tools that may be important for you as an end state. So where you want to be rather than where you are now. I'll keep it short. Thank you.
I think we are now open to questions. So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand.
Hi, it's Lydia Lorienti here. I'm new to County Court Victoria, and I'm just on the very beginning of my journey of establishing my team and my records management program, and we do use Microsoft products. I'm curious if anyone can answer how much you can realistically achieve with a really small team and with no extra bells and whistles. So if you weren't looking to get a third-party vendor in and have EDRMS in the background, how realistic it is to apply some records management governance and principles and oversight, working with what you've got, which is just the out-of-the-box Microsoft 365 products like Teams and SharePoint, with obviously other things going on, like there's other systems in play, there's a shared drive, or everything else in the mix. Thank you.
I think I could answer that one because we came from nothing and there was a team of 2. And at times it was a team of 1.5 and it was a team of 2. And it took us approximately 4 years, but that included COVID. So no governance, no processes at all, standard, pretty well standard rollout. Yes, we had a external organisation initially, but they disappeared fairly quickly.
The other thing that I would add to that is it's absolutely achievable, but to use the old adage, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Take it in small steps, because you can definitely achieve what you want to do using the Microsoft products and a manage in place approach for things that are captured in your other business applications. But don't expect everything to just flick a switch and it's going to happen. It takes time. It'll take a lot of liaison with your IT areas, and it takes building relationships with the rest of your business as well, and building up a really good broader information and records management culture, so that, as I said in my little speech before, people come to you to talk about it. And also, while I have the mic, just to clarify what I said about Cenetex before, it was basically, because they look after so many different organisations, you are unlikely to get purview access. Not that it's a difficult thing just because it's Cenetex. I realise how that sounded after I said it.
Yeah, I would echo the same. We are in a shared tenancy, so there are limitations and good things about being in a shared tenancy, but it is something to consider with what goal you're trying to end up with and how you want to get there, what's most important at the time. I think those key stakeholder relationships, especially with your legal and governance areas, with your risk and security areas, are key. We also have quite a petite team in our organisation in records management. But it's the nature of government, right? At the moment, we are all don't have infinite funds, and we are utilising them the best we can. So I think understanding how you can assure your organisation with good reporting tools would be one of my key do-overs. Yeah.
I think it's worth noting from all the conversations that we've had here, you're probably not going to nail it 100% of where you want it to be that first time. It is a journey. It's not an EDRMS rollout like they've typically been before. And I think you just have to accept that, because Sue mentioned it's not an EDRMS. It is a business system. It's probably never going to be an EDRMS. And I think that's okay, because because it's a business system. The business users prefer to use it. But it's knowing that changes can happen in the Microsoft environment quickly, without warning, and have unexpected side effects. So you need to build resilience in your team to be able to pivot and react to that kind of stuff. And Ben had an example this week. Change happened in Microsoft. It's caused some unexpected side effects in our environment. Nothing big. We can keep going on, but we'll need to look at it and address how to go forward.
Any other questions?
So there's a question online for Sharon and Ben in terms of the third-party product that you threw away, if you're able to name and shame.
No, I can't. Feel free to reach out to one of us privately if you like.
No problems. And then there's also some comments around that Microsoft SharePoint has good reporting once you get access to it. And that also State Records WA have created great guidance on how to modify your SharePoint config. So it's always nice to hear about what other jurisdictions are doing.
Yeah, so just on that reporting, we are in a shared tenancy. I probably didn't highlight that at the start. So that's where our reporting challenges come from, and working with Cenetex in supporting us in that model, but it's also being able to independently and work agile in that environment. So that's where reporting tools will support us that are third party. Yeah.
I think another thing that we haven't maybe mentioned while we're talking is that your networks are going to be invaluable in this space. Everybody is working in SharePoint, generally speaking, in one way, shape or form. So reach out, chat. Everybody's got lessons learned. I've engaged with multiple people in this room and heard about all their wins, all their hasn't gone exactly as planned, and as we did, pulled out a system that didn't work. So there's a wide variety of experiences across this room and across your wider network. Reach out because they're invaluable and everybody loves to sit down for a coffee and a chat.
Question down the back.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone here has been under probably large duress because of COVID and having to bring in systems like Microsoft and SharePoint and all the rest of it. But for those people who have worked in a relatively stable environment, do they do any business process analysis or include that in their planning strategy for implementation of systems?
Well, rollout, it was pretty standard that we went to the area and we asked them what kind of information, what were their major processes, etc., and tried to map the setup, the libraries, etc., or sites to those major processes. That allowed us also to link it to retention periods and access controls. So it was part of the process. Also was looking at, was there some processes that we could assist them with or automate in any degree? One area had quite a lot of requirements, and it actually was one of the areas that turned out to have the largest volume of documentation. So, and that was mainly driven, I must admit, by the two people who were involved in the project, who happened, one of them to be the manager. So when you've got that manager buy-in, you have success. And she was very keen on ensuring that her staff followed the correct processes, wanted to use metadata heavily to improve the way they did things and identification.
The reason why I asked that is because I went through that process myself, and we actually involved all the staff in the organisation, and we used that as a means of collaboration with the people and get them involved in the project, and it worked out fabulously. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenny from PROV. Can you answer, has there actually been any savings in costs from not having an EDRMS, but are there the third add-on applications actually end up costing just as much?
From our perspective, using native SharePoint, In some ways, yes. We've been able to, as I said, we did originally move out of HPRM fully, and then we moved back in for physical records. But when we moved back in for physical records, our user license count went from 200 odd people down to only having, I think, 35 licenses. So our license costs were significantly reduced because the amount of people who are registering physical records is significantly smaller than the amount of people who are using electronic records. So from that perspective, yes, we save money. And when we eventually move out of HPRM, we will hopefully save some more money there as well. But I'll let you guys speak to when you have a third-party product.
Yeah, we've also come mostly straight into Microsoft products. We are using third-party products that we find at the moment are essential, and that's probably offsetting the tenancy issues. So, yeah, I guess it's hard to quantify. I guess the saving is that you're training in one system, that you're addressing all the issues related to one system rather than multiple. And that you've got global support from that system product.
I might just add that it probably also depends on your Microsoft licensing. So there's a lot more functionality around your E5 licensing, which we already had at the VEC. So there wasn't a scale up for us. But if you've got an E3 license and you go to an E5 license, I'm sure there will be associated costs with that.
Any further questions? We'll go to you first and then you.
I think Jim Nicolau from Gambling Casino Control. I think this is more of a question for the community. I hear a lot of talk about lessons learned, moving to SharePoint. Is it of benefit to collaborate it together into something that can be shared around and talk about lessons learned, where things we could have done better? Because I know a lot of people on that journey, and I'd be happy to see some of that, more of that information. Maybe that's a question for PROV.
We've definitely been talking amongst ourselves about that recently. I think there is some difficulty in Vic government in terms of that knowledge that you've got in terms of the public-facing opinion on lessons learned, and ensuring that we support each other in the right and positive way. So there's definitely great networks that we've started, us at Suburban Rail Loop, through PROV, to build that knowledge retention and knowledge sharing. So yeah, I can't speak for PROV, but I definitely would encourage you to reach out through those mechanisms, and we are trying to grow that through our own networks. Yeah.
Can I just add, it'd be nice if PROV maybe had a list of agencies that would be willing to, and what stage they're at, and willing to participate.
This is Lindsay from Vedices. Our parent company is Kangan TAFE. So we also using SharePoint. I think before COVID, so like we tried to transfer from other platform, and also like it's good to hear a lot of organization is like also moving forward to SharePoint, and also we are on the journey to try to find some of the products can integrate with the SharePoint to have the functionality for the records management, which our company, our parents' company has done using one of the products. I'm not sure whether any of you have considered using any other products to integrate with SharePoint to do the records management, because they have the you can set up the retention period for each of the records, and then the system can do the automatic disposal and manage all these records according to the retention schedule according to your company. Yeah.
So for our organisation, we, well, as we said earlier, we actually removed a tool. So the way we manage retention within our SharePoint and Teams environment is we have a SharePoint site register, and for us it's a little bit of a manual process, but being a very small organisation, less than 300 people, we have, and at SharePoint and Teams environment that was managed from the get-go, we have a relatively manageable set of data that we oversee. So we have a site register. We manually go through and review sites and assign retention to those. And then we have a workflow in place so that once a retention is assigned and the period ticks over, it automates a workflow, informs the team, and we then go and review and dispose. So for us, it's probably a little bit different than having an actual tool. But yeah, so for us, the tool's not really something we're looking at the moment. But again, we're a very small organisation.
And we have one tool that we use. It's called Record Point, or the products, the company's name Record Point, the products are 365, and it's rule-based and it's got machine learning as well. We find that the rule-based part is the best, so you set up rules and apply a retention. So if it meets certain criteria, the rule will be applied to that type of documentation. And we link that to our SharePoint and Teams sites.
We're also using Records 365. There's a lot of analysis that's required of your team sites and records to ensure that that you are ingesting records in the right way, using it that way. And I assume the same of these guys are doing. We're doing similar things. You can go from 1.5 million records to 2 million records in the space of a month if you let it. So, and the rules also dependent on how good the infrastructure is behind that. So what metadata you're using, what naming conventions you're using, all that sort of thing. So for us, we have a growing experience with it, but that's how we're managing it.
I think it's worth noting as well, there are pretty powerful tools sitting in Purview for you to find and identify information. I believe there is auto classification around those retention periods. We looked at it but decided not to use it, mostly because it put a label against every individual items, and there were outcomes from that weren't favourable to the way that we work in our organisation. So we decided on a different approach, which was with the register. So I think SharePoint's one of those business systems that can be built and designed to match the way your business runs and your business works. So not everybody's implementation will be the same, even if it's down to having two Records 365s in place. They will use different metadata, they will use different triggers. I think that's one of the benefits of using it. It supports the way your business works because you build it that way. So you've got to be a bit pragmatic in looking at how you manage the retentions and everything like that. And I think there's a lot of capability to do it in a lot of different ways.
Thank you. And I think we are out of time now. We are over time. So, and I know some of you are booked in to go on a tour of the archives after this. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers today and our panel particularly, and thank all of our other speakers. And thank you all for your attendance. And thanks to those who were at home listening in. And as noted, a recording of this session will be placed on our website, so look out for that. And please join me in giving our last panel a bit of a And for those of you who are going on a tour of the archives, just meet out in the reception area. Thanks, everyone.